My fiancée said, "Don't come to my office party. It's just for staff." I showed up anyway, because I own the company. When her coworkers saw me walk in, she tried to pretend we'd broken up. Then I grabbed the mic and announced her promotion to ex-fiancée. When I first met Elena, she wasn't working for my company yet. I met her at a marketing conference in Austin, back when she was an intern running around with a clipboard and too much caffeine in her system. She had this confidence that came across like sunlight, sharp but easy to believe in. I'd built my company from a dusty apartment and too many all-nighters. At that point, it was thriving enough to have middle management, a board, and a few polished executives representing me while I operated quietly behind the scenes. That anonymity wasn't about paranoia, it was about control. I owned Haven Dynamics through a shell-holding firm called Ashbrook Ventures, and I rarely stepped into the office except for strategy meetings no one outside upper management knew about. When Elena joined Haven a year later as a PR coordinator, I didn't interfere. I wanted to see how she handled things without the shadow of my position behind her. I told her I worked in investment management, which wasn't a lie. I just omitted the part where her paycheck came from me. At first, things were normal. She loved the job, the office energy, the creative freedom. She'd come home with stories about her boss's impossible expectations and the endless stream of corporate events. But lately, her tone had changed. The stories had stopped being funny. They'd become filtered. When I'd ask how her day went, she'd shrug it off, distracted, like she was editing herself mid-sentence. Around early December, she started coming home late, always with the same line, "Team building night." That phrase started to taste bitter in my mouth. Team building 3 times a week. Sometimes she'd come home smelling like champagne. Sometimes like someone else's cologne. She'd begun talking about one coworker more than others. A guy named Corey, who worked in digital campaigns. "He's hilarious," she said once, flipping her hair like she wasn't aware of how she sounded. "He reminds me of you, actually." Same sarcastic humor. The words replayed in my head later that night as I looked at her phone on the counter, screen lighting up with a notification from Corey, team chat. I didn't touch it. I never had to before. But something felt off, like she was building an entire second life around this workplace I technically owned, but had been too distant to see up close. One Thursday, she brought up the annual office Christmas party. I asked if they were inviting plus ones. She hesitated for a second, too long, and then said, "It's just for staff. Company policy this year. The venue's too small." I nodded, pretending not to notice how she avoided eye contact. But I already knew the event's details. The company email had gone out a week before, sent by HR, listing the same venue we'd used for 3 years, a downtown hotel ballroom that could hold 300 people easily. That's when I realized something was wrong. It wasn't the lie itself, it was how smoothly she said it, as if she'd practiced. That night, she picked out her outfit in front of the mirror, humming to herself. She was wearing a dark blue dress she'd bought for our anniversary last year. She never wore it since. I asked why she chose that one, and she just smiled. "It's festive," she said. The next morning, she left early to help with setup. I watched her car pull out of the driveway, her phone buzzing in the passenger seat. Something inside me shifted. I'd built my entire business empire on reading people, investors, competitors, employees, and yet the person sleeping beside me had managed to blindside me for months. I called Anthony, one of my silent partners who handled operations while I stayed invisible. He was one of the few who knew the full ownership structure. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone light. "You going to the party tonight?" "Yeah, man," he replied. "Why? You thinking of showing up for once?" "I might. But I'm curious. Any +1 restrictions this year?" Anthony laughed. "Nope. HR actually encouraged bringing partners. They even booked a second floor for guests." "What?" I thanked him, hung up, and sat in silence. That one word, encouraged, hit me harder than anything else. Around 8 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Don't wait up. It's running late." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened Instagram and scrolled through a few of Haven's employee posts. Nothing unusual at first. Decorations, team selfies, the CEO Mr. Ashford doing his generic, "We appreciate you all" speech. But then I saw one story reposted by a junior analyst. A photo of Elena leaning close to Corey, champagne glasses clinking, both of them grinning like high school sweethearts. The caption said, "PR power couple killing it tonight." Something in me went cold. I didn't feel jealousy. I felt insulted. My fiancée, standing in my hotel, celebrating under the company name I built from debt and sleepless nights, while pretending I didn't exist. By 8:45, I was already changing into a suit. Not the tailored one from board meetings. Something simpler, cleaner, the kind of thing an investor would wear when checking in on his asset. I arrived at the hotel at 9:30. The valet asked if I was there for the Haven party. I said yes. He opened the door with a smile. unaware that the man walking in was the hidden majority owner of half the building. The lobby smelled like cinnamon and money, polished marble, dim lights, a jazz trio echoing from the ballroom. I paused by the entrance, scanning the room before stepping in. The staff had done a good job. Decorations were tasteful, the bar full, the crowd buzzing. I saw several faces I recognized from quarterly reports. None of them recognized me. At the center of the room stood Elena, laughing at something Corey said. Her hand rested on his sleeve. When her eyes caught mine across the room, her smile faltered so quickly it looked like she'd been struck. She whispered something to Corey, who turned to look, confused. Then she grabbed her purse and walked toward me, her expression switching from shock to irritation. "What are you doing here?" she hissed under her breath. "Celebrating," I said. "Big year. You weren't supposed to come. It's for employees only." "So I heard." Her voice lowered even more. "Grant, please, not here. People will get the wrong idea." "What idea would that be?" Before she could answer, one of her co-workers, a tall woman in HR, approached with a bright smile. "Oh, hi. You must be Elena's ex. She told us you two broke up months ago." I stared at Elena. She froze. The woman laughed awkwardly and wandered off when the silence stretched too long. Elena tried to explain, stumbling over half-finished excuses. Something about keeping work and personal life separate, about avoiding awkwardness. But I barely heard her. My attention was elsewhere, on the way Corey had put his arm around another woman moments ago, only to pull away when he noticed us. I realized she'd been living a double life, not just emotionally, but socially. Telling people she was single, downplaying our relationship, blending into this image she'd built at work. Maybe to seem more available. Maybe to climb faster. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse her. I just smiled, told her to enjoy the party, and walked toward the bar. That's when Mr. Ashford, the public CEO I'd installed years ago, spotted me and nearly dropped his drink. "Grant," he whispered, "what the hell are you doing here? They don't even know you exist." "I know," I said. "That's the fun part." He pulled me aside, nervous. "If you're planning to announce anything, please tell me first." "Relax," I said. "I'm just here to observe. Maybe say a few words." I looked back at Elena, who was now laughing too loudly, pretending everything was fine. The sight of it flipped a switch in my head. This wasn't about jealousy anymore. It was about deception, about watching someone rewrite reality while standing inside the truth you built. By the time the band started their next set, I'd already made my decision. Tomorrow, everyone in that ballroom would know exactly who I was. And Elena would learn that some masks don't just slip, they burn. I didn't sleep much that night. The party image replayed in my mind like a loop I couldn't pause. Elena's dress, her laugh, the way she'd looked at me as if I were the intruder. I sat on the edge of the bed until dawn, thinking not just about her, but about the strange irony of it all. The company I'd built from nothing had turned into a place where I was invisible. My fiancée, who owed half her professional growth to that very structure, now acted as if being connected to me was an embarrassment she had to hide. The next morning, the emails began pouring in. Employees thanking me, under my pseudonym, for a wonderful event. HR congratulating everyone for a successful night. Not one person mentioned what they'd seen. It was almost impressive how quickly a room full of people could pretend something never happened. By noon, I decided to stop pretending too. I called my assistant to have my name added to the list for that evening's follow-up event, a smaller after-party meant for management and key clients. It was still at the same hotel. The email had described it as semi-formal, internal only. Perfect. When the sun went down, I dressed again, this time in a black suit and coat. I took a cab instead of driving. The anonymity helped me think. On the way there, I stared out the window and wondered how many times I'd chosen comfort over confrontation. The truth was, I'd been too cautious, too careful not to disturb the illusion of peace. That night, the illusion would die. The ballroom looked different this time. Dimmed lights, fewer people, more expensive liquor. The small jazz trio had been replaced by a DJ playing low ambient music. Conversations buzzed in corners. I recognized faces from every department. When I walked in, I noticed how quickly people's eyes flickered toward me, then away. They didn't know who I was, but they sensed something. Presence has a weight when you've carried authority for too long. It shows even when you don't want it to. Elena was near the back, surrounded by her team, laughing too loudly again. Beside her stood Corey, leaning in close. She didn't see me at first. When she finally did, her posture stiffened. Her expression flickered through confusion, irritation, and panic in a matter of seconds. She whispered something to Corey, and they both disappeared toward the bar. I moved through the room slowly, exchanging small talk with department heads, the kind who spoke in polished, rehearsed tones about quarterly numbers and future growth. None of them had any idea I was the man who'd signed their contracts. That anonymity gave me freedom. It let me look at the culture of the place through unfiltered glass. And what I saw was disappointing. People chasing optics, status, flattery. The same disease that had quietly infected Elena. Eventually, I found Mr. Ashford, standing near the stage with a glass of whiskey. He looked relieved and worried all at once when he saw me. I told him to relax, that I just wanted to say a few words later. He tried to convince me to delay any formal appearance, fearing disruption, but I'd already decided that silence had cost too much. The speeches began around 9. First, HR thanked everyone for their commitment to excellence. Then a department head rambled about synergy and innovation. I stood in the shadows behind the curtain, listening. My pulse was steady. I waited until the DJ adjusted the microphone for the final, closing remarks. That's when I stepped out. The crowd turned as if a chill had passed through the room. The DJ froze. Ashford's face went pale. Someone clapped awkwardly before realizing no one else was. I walked to the center and took the microphone. My voice carried easily, trained by years of pitching investors. I introduced myself with my full name, Grant Warren, and told them I had something to share. For a moment, there was polite confusion. Then someone in the back whispered the company name. The murmurs spread like static. Recognition clicked in a few faces, mostly from old reports or legal memos they'd never read carefully enough. The realization that the silent partner was standing right there hit the room like a quiet explosion. I spoke calmly about the company's founding, about how it had started with 3 people and a borrowed laptop. I thanked everyone for helping it grow into what it was now. My tone was composed, measured, until I shifted. I said transparency mattered. That honesty, both professional and personal, defined culture. And that sometimes, hidden things rot what you build if you ignore them too long. I didn't mention Elena's name immediately. I didn't need to. People began connecting dots themselves. Her department had already seen her reaction. Corey's face had drained of color. When I finally said her name, it wasn't loud. It didn't need volume. It carried authority that couldn't be mistaken for anger. I said I wanted to recognize one of our team members for her dedication to company events and her commitment to networking. Laughter rippled uncertainly across the room. Then I paused and said I had one more announcement to make, something personal but necessary. I told them that effective immediately, Elena would no longer be my fiancée. Silence hit the room like a vacuum. Some people gasped. Someone at the bar dropped a glass. I handed the microphone back and walked off the stage without another word. The reaction unfolded in real time behind me. Whispers, the scrape of chairs, someone starting to record. Elena followed me halfway across the ballroom, eyes wide, face white, mouthing words that didn't form sentences. She tried to grab my arm, but I kept walking. Outside in the hallway, the hotel's muted carpet and soft lighting felt like another world. I waited by the elevators, hearing distant murmurs from behind the door. The quiet that followed wasn't satisfying. It was sobering. The reveal had been necessary, not triumphant. I rode the elevator down alone, ignoring the messages buzzing on my phone. One from Ashford, one from my assistant, several from unknown numbers that had to be her coworkers. I didn't open any of them. I needed the silence to stretch a little longer. When I stepped into the street, the December air bit through my suit. Across the avenue, the hotel windows shimmered with reflected light, small silhouettes moving behind curtains. Somewhere in that glittering glass was Elena, surrounded by gossip she'd never escape. I walked for a while before hailing a cab. The city felt both alive and hollow. Every sound, the traffic, the laughter from nearby bars, seemed distant. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired of illusions, tired of pretending that surface charm meant stability. Back home, the house was quiet. Her makeup bag still sat on the counter, her coat still hanging by the door. I didn't touch any of it. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the faint reflection of my face in the window. The night had ended exactly as it needed to. The truth had been spoken in front of everyone who mattered. What came next, I didn't yet know. But for the first time in months, I finally felt awake. By the time the sun came up, my name was trending on half a dozen corporate gossip forums. The video had spread faster than I'd thought possible. Someone at the party, probably one of the marketing interns, had recorded the entire scene from the moment I walked on stage to the second I handed the microphone back. The caption read, "When the real boss shows up and exposes his fiancée at the office party." I hadn't planned for it to go viral, but once it did, I didn't bother suppressing it. The truth didn't need spin. It needed oxygen. At 7 in the morning, I checked my email. HR had already sent a flurry of damage control messages, statements about professionalism, reminders of confidentiality, draft press responses. I ignored them all. I wasn't going to let the story get rewritten to make anyone comfortable. When I arrived at the office that afternoon, The entire floor went silent. It was strange walking through a space that was both mine and alien. I'd built it, funded it, shaped it, but until that moment, I'd been a ghost haunting my own empire. Now, everyone saw the ghost's face. I didn't go to my corner office. Instead, I stopped by the PR department, Elena's territory. The room froze when I stepped inside. Desks clattered as people scrambled to look busy. I didn't speak to her directly. She was sitting near the back, eyes red, pretending to focus on her monitor. I told the team to meet in the conference room. 10 minutes later, I stood at the head of the long table, sunlight cutting through the glass walls. Nobody said a word. I addressed them not as the betrayed fiancé, but as the owner. I spoke about trust, about representation, about how every company, especially one built on branding and perception, needed integrity more than slogans. I didn't mention Elena's name, but every sentence was a shadow that stretched in her direction. When the meeting ended, she was the last to stand. Her voice cracked when she said she wanted to explain. I told her she didn't know me that in the office. I turned and left before she could continue. Outside, the corridor buzzed with whispers. Employees who once treated me as a distant executive now looked at me like a living headline. I didn't enjoy it. Public humiliation, even deserved, corrodes everything it touches, including the person who delivers it. But it was necessary. Sometimes exposure is the only disinfectant that works. By evening, reporters began emailing. They'd found the connection between Haven Dynamics and my holding company. For years, I'd preferred anonymity to keep focus on the product rather than the founder, but now there was no point hiding. The clip had already made its way to LinkedIn and corporate gossip channels. Instead of releasing a PR statement, I posted something brief from my verified account. Leadership begins at home. Truth doesn't need a stage, but sometimes it finds one. That post was shared thousands of times in hours. Some praised me. Others called me vindictive. A few said it was a power move. They were wrong. Power had nothing to do with it. It was about showing that duplicity, no matter how personal, poisons everything it touches, including business. Elena didn't show up to work the next day. HR called to inform me she'd requested immediate leave. The official story was emotional distress. The unofficial one was that she couldn't walk into a room without people whispering. Corey, the man she'd been seeing, sent in his resignation the following morning. His email was a page long and filled with vague apologies about misunderstandings. I didn't respond. There was nothing to clarify. A week passed like a slow echo. The internet moved on, but inside the company, silence lingered. I avoided the PR floor entirely. Ashford tried to convince me to make a formal apology to calm the optics, but I refused. We hadn't done anything wrong. Transparency doesn't need an apology. On Friday, I received a message from Elena. It was short. Can we talk? Just once. I hesitated before replying. There was a part of me that still wanted closure, not forgiveness, just understanding. So we met that evening at a small cafe away from downtown, where no one would recognize us. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her confidence was gone, her posture uncertain. She said she'd panicked at the party because she was scared of how people at work would treat her if they knew she was engaged to the owner. She'd thought it would look like favoritism, that people would stop taking her seriously. That might have been believable if she hadn't gone as far as pretending to be single. Then she said something that revealed the truth behind it all. She'd started seeing Corey because she wanted to feel independent, to prove she wasn't just someone's fiancé. But the way she said it, casual, defensive, turned the confession into a justification. I didn't argue. I let her talk until the excuses ran dry. When she asked if I could ever forgive her, I told her forgiveness wasn't the problem, trust was. Once you see someone lie while smiling, you never unsee it. We parted without drama. She left quietly, clutching her purse like it held the last pieces of a life she'd dropped. That night, I sat at my desk staring at the company's charter documents. Her name appeared in one of the PR projects as lead coordinator. I considered deleting it, but I didn't. Erasing her wouldn't fix anything. The records would stay, a reminder of what happens when appearances replace honesty. Over the weekend, the story began to fade from public attention, replaced by newer scandals. But inside the building, her absence was louder than any rumor. HR launched an internal review, not because I asked them to, but because gossip had turned into something more serious. Employees claimed she'd been sharing drafts of confidential material with external consultants. When IT audited her communications, they found forwarded client lists sent from her personal email to an account connected to a rival firm. Corey's name appeared there too. That changed everything. On Monday morning, I called an emergency meeting with the legal team. They confirmed that both of them had violated confidentiality agreements. I didn't have to lift a finger. The board voted unanimously to terminate their contracts and pursue civil penalties. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about principle. A company can recover from scandal, but not from hypocrisy. As I left the meeting room, I thought about how surreal it was that a simple lie about an office party had unraveled into corporate espionage. What started as emotional betrayal had turned into something far uglier. That night, I drove past the hotel where it had all happened. The lights were still up for another corporate event. Different people, different laughter. But for me, that place had already become something else, a monument to exposure, to what truth looks like when it's forced out into the open. It wasn't closure I felt. It was something quieter, acceptance, maybe. The kind that doesn't heal right away, but at least stops bleeding. The fallout was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like everything false had finally been burned away. The official board meeting to close the investigation was held 2 weeks later. By then, everything that needed to surface had already done so. The digital forensics report confirmed what the legal team suspected. Corey had used Elena's credentials to access restricted project folders, forwarding proposal drafts to a competing firm that had been courting Haven's clients for months. The timing matched too perfectly for coincidence. The motive was simple. Corey had been promised a position there, and Elena had been his unknowing, or perhaps half-knowing, accomplice. I listened to the lawyers outline their findings in the sterile conference room, the kind that smells faintly of coffee and panic. When they finished, the board voted unanimously to terminate both contracts and proceed with legal action. Neither of them attended. Their attorneys sent statements filled with the usual language: confusion, miscommunication, emotional distress. But the evidence was concrete. The only gray area was whether Elena truly knew what she was helping him do. That question didn't matter anymore. Trust is binary. Once broken, everything else becomes noise. When the meeting adjourned, Ashford approached me in the hallway. His face carried that careful neutrality executives wear when they're afraid of stepping on bruises. He said the company's reputation could recover faster if I made a personal statement, maybe even a controlled interview about transparency and leadership. I told him to draft one, but make it simple: no PR gloss, no corporate slogans, just truth. The following week, the company released a video statement. I sat behind a plain desk, speaking directly to the camera, not as a victim or a CEO, but as someone explaining a lesson in accountability. I talked about ethics, about how deception in any form, professional or personal, corrodes everything it touches. I didn't mention names. I didn't need to. The public already knew. The clip went viral again, though for a different reason this time. People called it the most honest thing a business leader had said in years. Investors who had been hesitant after the scandal started calling back. Employees began sending emails about how they respected the transparency. The irony was heavy. The very event meant to humiliate me had turned into a case study in integrity. Behind the scenes, the legal process moved faster than I expected. Corey tried to negotiate, but his involvement was too obvious. He ended up settling, agreeing to a non-compete clause and a restitution payment that would haunt him for years. Elena didn't fight the termination. Her lawyer reached out privately, asking for leniency. There was no anger left in me, only exhaustion. I told them I wouldn't pursue her financially, only that she was permanently blacklisted from any affiliated firm. They accepted without argument. A month later, I read that she had moved back to her hometown and started working at a small marketing agency, the kind that managed local events and restaurant ads. It was a far fall from where she'd been headed, but not the worst fate. I wasn't interested in destroying her. Some lessons simply deliver themselves. At the company, things shifted. Meetings became quieter, more direct. People looked me in the eye again. HR introduced stricter boundaries for interoffice relationships, not because of scandal management, but because the culture itself had changed. Everyone had seen what happens when pretense takes over professionalism. I stopped hiding behind the holding firm and began appearing in quarterly meetings under my real name. For years, I'd believed anonymity gave me perspective, but it had only built distance, the kind where people forget leadership is human. When I finally stepped into the open, I saw how much had gone unspoken. And strangely, I felt lighter. In the following months, the company regained its footing. A client that had nearly defected returned after seeing the transparency with which we handled everything. Investors praised the honesty. Articles framed it as a case of ethical disruption, the kind of headline that feeds think pieces and MBA discussions. I ignored most of it. I wasn't looking for vindication. I only wanted the noise to fade. At home, the quiet took longer to settle. There were traces of her everywhere, small things I hadn't noticed before: a scarf tucked into the closet, a framed photo on the hallway shelf, her handwriting on sticky notes near my computer. I left them for a while, not out of sentimentality, but because erasing her too quickly felt dishonest. Eventually, one Sunday morning, I boxed everything and stored it in the attic. Not thrown away, just out of sight. like a chapter closed but not burned. Months passed. The hotel where it all happened began hosting other company parties again, and one evening, I received an invitation to an event there, a charity gala hosted by a partner firm. I almost declined, but something made me accept. I arrived late, walked into the same ballroom, and it was surreal how ordinary it felt. Different faces, same chandeliers, same stage. The air carried laughter, ambition, small talk, everything that had once concealed betrayal. I stood near the back for a few minutes, unnoticed, then left. Closure doesn't need applause. Sometimes it's just silence that doesn't hurt anymore. The viral video still circulates occasionally. People repost it under captions like, "Don't lie to the boss," or "Best breakup ever." I never comment. They see drama. I see a turning point. A reminder that you can lose someone you love and still come out cleaner for it. One evening, while reviewing a new PR proposal, I came across a young coordinator's name on a press release draft. She'd written about corporate integrity with more sincerity than I'd seen in years. I approved her promotion immediately. Maybe it was sentimental. Maybe it was my way of believing that people still choose honesty, even after watching how easily it shatters. The scandal became a closed file in the archives. No one brought up Elena's name anymore. In meetings, when the subject of internal ethics came up, someone always mentioned that transparency wasn't a policy at Haven Dynamics. It was culture. That was enough for me. Sometimes I still pass the cafe where we had our last conversation. The same tables, same low light, same quiet hum of espresso machines. I never go inside. There's nothing to find there anymore. Just a memory that doesn't ache, only exists. In the end, it wasn't the exposure or the revenge that changed everything. It was what came after, the silence that forced reflection, the absence that made room for clarity. The night I grabbed that microphone, I didn't just end an engagement. I ended a version of myself that tolerated half-truths in the name of peace. Now, when people mention that clip or the story behind it, I smile politely and say it taught me more about leadership than any boardroom ever could.